The Zarkat descended upon Earth like locusts, cold, calculating, and utterly unimpressed. They were a species forged in the fires of countless wars, their technology a testament to their superiority. To them, Earth was little more than a primitive speck in the galaxy, barely worth a glance. The humans, while numerous, were weak, reliant on outdated weapons and laughable ideas about their place in the universe. The Zarkat saw them as a species stuck in the past, clinging to stories and myths that held no meaning in the face of progress. Their ships darkened the skies over the deserts of Egypt, blotting out the sun as they prepared to strip the land of everything valuable. The Zarkat scoffed at the humans' reverence for this ancient place. To them, the monuments and tombs were nothing but relics of a backward civilization, artifacts to be crushed under the weight of their advanced machinery. As their machines tore into the earth, their laughter echoed through the desert. They mocked the humans' obsession with their so-called history, particularly the legends of a forgotten warrior king who supposedly wielded the power of the desert itself. The Scorpion King, they called him, a figure who commanded armies and held the land in his grasp. But to the Zarkat, it was all a joke. What was a long-dead king to them? They had conquered entire star systems. They had destroyed planets. The myths of Earth were nothing more than dust, soon to be swept away by their might. The desecration began without hesitation. Massive mining machines plowed into sacred burial grounds, tearing through tombs that had stood untouched for millennia. Ancient artifacts were ripped from the sand, their importance lost on the Zarkat, who saw only trinkets in place of treasure. Sarcophagi were shattered, priceless relics obliterated as the Zarkat dug deeper, greedier, searching for something, anything, of value beneath the surface. But the desert did not remain silent. At first, the disturbances were subtle. A gust of wind, a shimmer of heat that seemed to distort the air more than usual. Some of the Zarkat soldiers noticed, their laughter dying down as they felt something shift beneath their feet. They dismissed it, of course. Earth was an unstable planet, prone to strange weather and unpredictable phenomena. To them, it was merely an inconvenience. Yet, as they delved deeper into the sands, they triggered something ancient, something powerful. A pulse of energy, faint at first, rippled through the ground, unnoticed by most of the alien invaders. The desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The Zarkat continued their work, oblivious to the forces they were awakening. The tomb they had unearthed was unlike the others. It was older, more elaborate, and sealed in ways they could not understand. But to them, it was just another ruin to be torn apart. The first true sign came without warning. A sudden, violent tremor shook the ground beneath their machines. Sand swirled in strange patterns, and an unnatural stillness fell over the desert. The energy pulse returned, this time stronger, sending a jolt through the air. The Zarkat commanders ordered their troops to press on, confident that nothing on this planet could stand against them. But deep within the earth, something stirred. The humans had been watching from the edges, a small band of archaeologists and resistance fighters who had long since accepted that Earth's days were numbered. Yet they couldn't shake the feeling that something greater was at play. They had seen the Zarkat tearing through Egypt's sacred sites, and they knew these were not just dusty ruins. They were places of power, built by people who understood the forces of the land. Among them was an old historian, someone who had dedicated their life to understanding the legends of the Scorpion King. For years they had been dismissed by their peers, written off as a dreamer obsessed with myths. But as they watched the Zarkat soldiers pry open the tomb's entrance, they felt a deep sense of foreboding. This was no ordinary burial site. The archaeologists and resistance fighters exchanged uneasy glances as the ground trembled beneath their feet. They had seen the devastation the Zarkat had brought upon Earth, the cities that had fallen, the people enslaved or killed. Yet there was something different about this moment. It was as though the desert itself was reacting, preparing for something they couldn't quite understand. As the Zarkat soldiers forced open the final seal on the tomb, the energy pulse became a wave, washing over the desert like a signal. It was faint but unmistakable. Something was waking up. The old historian whispered to themselves, their voice barely audible over the wind. "They have no idea what they've done." The others glanced at them, confused. They hadn't believed in the old stories, But now, in the face of something unknown, doubt crept into their minds. They knew the Zarkat were powerful, unstoppable, even. But the ancient forces stirring beneath the sand were beyond anything they had ever encountered. The Zarkat, still laughing, still confident in their supremacy, had no idea what they had unleashed. But the humans knew. Something ancient, something forgotten, was rising from the depths. And it would not be easily contained. The desert had always been a place of mystery, but now, it was alive with something far beyond comprehension. The Zarkat continued their work, pilfering the land, tearing deeper into the ancient ruins, confident in their superiority. But there were signs, things they couldn't explain. Sandstorms whipped up out of nowhere, far stronger than any local phenomenon should be. Strange, fleeting shapes appeared in the distance, like ghosts wandering through the desert. The Zarkat dismissed these occurrences as mere anomalies. The wind, the heat, they were natural. Yet, beneath their arrogance, a sliver of unease had started to grow. It was in the dead of night when the real terror began. A group of Zarkat engineers worked late, attempting to breach the final chamber of the tomb they believed held riches beyond imagination. They were close, mere inches away from opening it fully, when the desert itself seemed to resist them. The air grew heavy, and the ground trembled, not just from their machinery, but from something deeper, something ancient. Then, without warning, a blast of energy surged from the tomb. It was unlike anything the Zarkat had ever encountered, pure, raw power that rippled through the night, turning the sands to glass where it struck. The tomb cracked open, and a figure stepped forth, imposing, regal, clad in armor older than the stars the Zarkat had traveled through to get here. His eyes glowed with an unearthly light, the desert bending to his will. This was no myth, no legend to laugh at. This was the Scorpion King, and he was very real. The Zarkat froze, their bravado draining away as the figure raised his hand, commanding the sands around him. The desert came alive, swirling in violent storms that engulfed their machines. They fired their weapons, energy beams tearing through the air, but the Scorpion King did not flinch. He moved with the grace of someone who had fought 1,000 battles, someone who had never lost. The energy blasts dissipated as if they were nothing more than whispers in the wind. The Zarkat had never seen anything like it. They prided themselves on their technology, their invincible shields and weapons that could decimate planets. Yet here, on this backward world, those very tools of war were useless. And then the earth began to tremble once more. From the sands, figures started to rise. Soldiers, spectral, ghostly warriors, emerged, dressed in the armor of a time long forgotten. They marched with the same purpose they once had in life, their loyalty to the Scorpion King unbroken by the passage of millennia. The Zarkat, facing down an army of the dead, panicked. Their bravado crumbled. Their weapons were useless, their shields flickered and failed. The warriors moved like shadows, cutting through their ranks with the ease of a blade through silk. The Scorpion King stood at the center of it all, commanding the desert, summoning the spirits of those who had once fought for him. He had been a protector, a ruler who commanded not just respect, but the very forces of nature. And now, after centuries of rest, he had returned, called forth by the arrogance of an alien race that thought itself untouchable. The Zarkat, for all their advanced technology, had no defense against this ancient power. They were fighting something they could not understand. In the distance, the human resistance watched in awe. The historian who had spent years studying the legends of the Scorpion King couldn't believe what they were seeing. The stories had been true. Every word, every inscription, it had all pointed to this moment. The Scorpion King had been waiting, lying dormant, until the time came to defend his land once more. The humans, while still fearful of the power they were witnessing, saw this as their chance. They had no illusions about their ability to defeat the Zarkat on their own. Their weapons were nothing compared to the alien invaders. But now, with the Scorpion King on their side, they had a fighting chance. The historian stepped forward, eyes wide, understanding dawning. They had studied the old hieroglyphs, the ancient rituals, and now they knew this was prophecy fulfilled. Humanity was never meant to stand alone. They were meant to stand alongside their ancient protector, to defend their world not with brute force, but with the strength of their heritage. The historian's heart raced as they realized the full implications. The Scorpion King had awakened because Earth was in danger, not just from the Zarkat, but from any who would dare desecrate its ancient past. The Zarkat, scrambling, tried to regroup, but it was too late. Their arrogance had undone them. The Scorpion King and his spectral army moved with terrifying efficiency, cutting through their ranks with ease. The invaders, once so confident, were now nothing more than prey in the desert night. The Zarkat, rattled but still confident in their superiority, unleashed their most formidable weapons. Massive walkers equipped with energy cannons stomped across the desert, flanked by elite troops in power armor. Airborne drones hummed above, scanning for targets with unerring precision. Their strategy was simple: overwhelm the Scorpion King with brute force, drown him in technology that no ancient power could match. But the Zarkat hadn't accounted for the desert itself turning against them. As they advanced, the sands rose in rebellion. Giant sandstorms whipped up seemingly from nowhere, engulfing their forces in a whirlwind of confusion. The air shimmered with heat and distortion, creating mirages that disoriented their soldiers. Troops fired at shadows, wasting energy on phantoms that weren't there. The drones, usually so reliable, malfunctioned in the chaotic winds, crashing into dunes or simply vanishing into the swirling storm. Through the chaos, the Scorpion King moved with the precision of a predator. His ancient armor gleamed faintly in the dim light of the desert, his every step purposeful. He cut through the Zarkat ranks like a scythe, his power undeniable. Spectral warriors surged around him, their ghostly forms undeterred by the advanced weapons of the invaders. Energy blasts that would have vaporized a living soldier passed harmlessly through the specters, leaving the Zarkat to realize, too late, that their technology was useless against this otherworldly force. Meanwhile, the humans had joined the fray. Resistance fighters, along with the historian and archaeologists who had long believed in the legend, saw their opportunity. Armed with knowledge passed down through generations, they understood the desert far better than the invaders ever could. They navigated the terrain with ease, using natural cover and the confusion of the sandstorms to their advantage. But more importantly, they had something the Zarkat didn't: an understanding of the Scorpion King's legacy. The historian, poring over ancient texts and hieroglyphs, found ways to communicate with the Scorpion King. They performed rituals, tracing symbols in the sand that resonated with the power of the desert. These ancient incantations, once dismissed as mere folklore, now held real power. The Scorpion King, recognizing the humans as allies, began to fight not just for his land, but for the people of Earth. As the battle raged, the humans discovered that certain artifacts and symbols could amplify the Scorpion King's control over the desert. One of the resistance fighters unearthed an ancient ankh from a tomb, holding it up as they recited a forgotten prayer. The winds obeyed, swirling around the Scorpion King and his army, amplifying his strength. With each incantation, the desert became more hostile to the Zarkat, warping their reality and disrupting their technology. Their energy shields flickered and died, their communication scrambled by forces they could neither predict nor understand. The Zarkat, so accustomed to dominance, found themselves trapped. Every attempt to regroup was met with disaster. Their commanders, once so confident, grew frantic. They barked orders, trying to reform their lines, but the desert had become a nightmare they couldn't escape. The Scorpion King's warriors, spectral and silent, stalked through the storm, their weapons cutting down Zarkat soldiers with terrifying ease. The invaders were no longer fighting an enemy they could see, they were battling the land itself. Psychological terror began to take hold. The Zarkat were not used to fear. They had conquered worlds, wiped out civilizations, and never encountered anything they couldn't subdue with superior firepower. But now, they were being hunted. The ghostly forms of the spectral warriors appeared and vanished in the blink of an eye, moving through the desert like wraiths. The Zarkat fired blindly, their nerves shattered. Every shadow seemed like a threat, every gust of wind a potential attack. Some of the Zarkat troops broke rank, retreating in panic, only to find that the desert would not let them escape. The sand itself shifted beneath their feet, leading them in circles or swallowing them whole. The more they struggled, the deeper they sank into the unforgiving terrain. The Scorpion King, ever watchful, manipulated the sands with a flick of his hand, trapping the invaders in a deadly game of cat and mouse. As the Zarkat grew more desperate, their leaders realized they were facing not just a physical battle, but one of the mind. Their advanced tactics, their superior weapons, none of it mattered here. They were fighting an enemy who was not constrained by the rules of warfare they understood. The Scorpion King and his spectral army operated on a different plane, one where technology held no sway, and fear was as powerful as any weapon. The humans, seeing the Zarkat unravel, pressed their advantage. They unearthed more artifacts, scouring the tombs for anything that could further tip the balance in their favor. They chanted in ancient tongues, tracing symbols in the sand that enhanced the Scorpion King's power. At one point, they discovered an ancient staff that, when wielded in the presence of the Scorpion King, could disable the energy barriers protecting the Zarkat's command center. With that final tool, the resistance fighters delivered a crippling blow. The Zarkat, now fully aware of their doom, had nowhere left to run. Their technology had failed them. Their soldiers were scattered and demoralized. The desert, once an unremarkable battlefield, had turned into a living nightmare that consumed everything they threw at it. And at the heart of it all stood the Scorpion King, untouched by the chaos around him, his spectral army unwavering. He had fought for his land and life, and now, in death, he was defending it once more. The legend had come alive, and it was stronger than anything the Zarkat could have ever imagined. The Zarkat, though battered and broken, weren't ready to admit defeat. In a final desperate attempt, they deployed their most powerful asset, their massive flagship, a fortress in the sky bristling with weaponry that had laid waste to entire worlds. It descended over the battlefield, casting an ominous shadow across the desert. From its underbelly, countless attack ships and drones poured out, launching a relentless offensive aimed at overwhelming the Scorpion King and his spectral army once and for all. The humans watched from the ground, their hearts sinking as they saw the sheer magnitude of the Zarkat's final push. It seemed impossible that any ancient force, no matter how powerful, could withstand such an onslaught. But the Scorpion King stood unflinching, his glowing eyes fixed on the incoming fleet. His connection to the desert, to the very land itself, deepened in that moment. He raised his arms to the sky, and the sands responded. A storm unlike any other began to form, a swirling vortex of sand and wind so massive that it blotted out the sun. The sky darkened as the Scorpion King channeled the full fury of the desert. The Zarkat fleet, with all its technological prowess, was swallowed by the storm. Their ships, once so mighty, were torn apart by the violent winds, their sleek surfaces shredded by the relentless barrage of sand. Drones malfunctioned and crashed. Pilots lost control, spinning helplessly into the maelstrom. On the ground, the Zarkat ground forces watched in horror as their fleet was decimated above them. Their once invincible war machine was crumbling before their eyes. The Zarkat commanders, realizing the full extent of their miscalculation, issued frantic orders. Some units attempted to retreat, scrambling for any means of escape. Others, too proud to flee, made a last-ditch stand, their weapons firing uselessly into the storm. But there was no escape. The desert had claimed them. In the heart of the chaos, the Scorpion King moved with purpose. He directed the storm with an ancient precision, ensuring that no Zarkat could escape unscathed. His spectral army, undeterred by the storm, continued their silent march across the battlefield, finishing off any invaders who still clung to life. The battle was all but over. With their forces in disarray and their fleet decimated, the Zarkat leadership faced a grim choice: surrender or perish. Their technological superiority had failed them. The legends they had once mocked had risen to destroy them. In a move born out of desperation, a small faction of the Zarkat surrendered, hoping to negotiate their survival. Others, too proud to admit defeat, chose to flee, their remaining ships retreating into the depths of space, forever haunted by the nightmare they had unleashed on Earth. As the storm began to subside, the Scorpion King surveyed the battlefield. His purpose was fulfilled. He had defended his land once more, just as he had done millennia ago. Without a word, he turned and began to walk back toward the tomb from which he had risen. His spectral army followed, fading into the sands as they returned to their eternal rest. The humans watched in reverent silence as the Scorpion King vanished into the desert, his presence lingering in the air like an ancient whisper. In the aftermath, humanity stood united, not just in victory but in understanding. They had witnessed the power of their own history, the strength that lay in their legends and myths. The Scorpion King, once a figure of folklore, had become a symbol of Earth's resilience, a reminder that there was more to their heritage than technology and progress. The humans, who had always looked to the future, now found new respect for their past. The desert tombs, once seen as relics of a bygone era, were now revered as sacred ground. No longer would they be excavated for treasures or desecrated in the name of progress. Instead, they were honored as symbols of Earth's enduring strength, places where the past could teach the present how to survive. Archaeologists, historians, and ordinary citizens alike gathered in the desert, not to take but to remember. The Scorpion King's legacy would not be forgotten. As humanity began the process of rebuilding, they did so with a new sense of purpose. The Zarkat had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest, but they had left with a deep respect and fear of the planet they had once ridiculed. The few Zarkat ships that managed to escape the battle fled into the void, carrying with them tales of Earth's ancient powers. They spread the story across the stars, warning other would-be conquerors that Earth was no mere primitive world. Its legends were real, and they could destroy even the most advanced civilizations. For the first time in a long while, Earth stood united. The divisions that had once separated nations and peoples seemed smaller now, in light of what they had all witnessed. Humanity had been saved not by the most advanced technology, but by the wisdom of the past, by an ancient warrior king who had risen from legend to protect his land once more. And so, the humans looked to the future with newfound pride. They had faced an enemy from the stars and prevailed, not because of their machines or their weapons, but because they had embraced the full scope of who they were, both their history and their heritage. They had learned that true strength wasn't just about progress or technology. Sometimes, it came from remembering where you came from. As the last of the Zarkat ships vanished from the skies, Earth stood as a testament to the power of its past. The Scorpion King had returned to his rest, but his legacy would live on, a reminder to all who dared challenge Earth that its greatest strength lay in its ancient soul.